lunch. 네, 식사 맛있게 하셨나요? 네, 저희 이제 이어서
We will start the first session.
2022 Korea Maritime Week will now begin. Let us now begin with session 1 under the theme Response to Climate Crisis in the Maritime Sector. And our first speaker will be Woo Seung-sim, Senior Vice President of the Korea Shipbuilding and Offshore Engineering. And the theme will be Status and Prospect of Eco-Friendly Fuel Ship Development. It looks like he's already on the stage, so let's give him a big round of applause.
예, 감사합니다.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I am Shim Woo-seung from KSA. I am very honored to make a presentation in this session for Korea Maritime Week. I'm going to present the status and prospect of eco-friendly fuel ship development. First, we will have a look at the shipbuilding market, alternative fuel, and current status of eco-friendly fuel ship development. Lastly, I would like to introduce to you our roadmap. As you know very well, in the shipbuilding and maritime sector, decarbonization is a very important topic. IMO announced that it will gradually decrease greenhouse gas emission from shipping, and by 2050, it will reduce the greenhouse gas emission per transport work 70%. To achieve this, LNG, LPG, methanol, and other alternative fuels are essential. In the shipbuilding market, the biggest change is the use of dual fuel. There's an increasing demand for dual fuel ships. As you see on the table, this is the dual fuel ship orders in Hyundai Heavy Industry Group. Dual fuel engine vessels now accounts for much larger proportion. And LNG DF vessels have especially received a large amount of orders. And LNG, LPG, and methanol and ethane are playing a very important role. Many people have great interest in methanol as an alternative engine. If you look at the right side, you see the large container vessels that use methanol as vessels. Ammonia is carbon-free fuel, and there's an increasing demand and interest in ammonia. This is the international situation. As you see in the graph, price of LNG and price of oil significantly increased, which is affected by the international geopolitical situation. If the price continues to increase, then it will rather become easier for us to move towards alternative fuel as fuel for vessels. In this slide, another change in the shipbuilding market is that GHG regulations are being strengthened and reinforced. As we discussed in the morning session, the greenhouse gas regulation now covers wider scope of type of greenhouse gases and wider scope of life cycle. So shipping industry has been under EEDI and EEXI, but recently operating measures are being strengthened, such as CII. And as you see on the right side, GHG emission is now being considered from wake to well perspective. And the type of greenhouse gas now includes all types of GHG gases. In this slide, I want to talk about the demand and prospect of alternative marine fuel. Let's have a look at the situation from IMO's EEDI regulation. If you look at VLCC, if we want to meet the EEDI regulation, we need to move towards alternative fuel, and by 2050 we will have to take additional measures like slow steaming. Slow steaming requires vessels to reduce their logistics speed, and we have to achieve zero emission. So slow steaming alone has limitations in meeting the GHG reduction target. So for the time being, actually by 2050 or after 2050, low carbon or zero carbon fuel could be adopted in the market. Recently, well to wake regulation has been discussed more aggressively than before. So shipping companies that use carbon fuel will have to pay penalty. If you look into details of the regulation, in the case of oil-fueled ships or LNG-fueled ships, many of them exceed the criteria of penalty, and they will have to pay penalty after 2030. So after 2030, low carbon or zero carbon fuel like biofuel will be adopted in the market more actively than before. Then, what is the prospect of alternative marine fuel? IEAE describes that there will be change in fuel from oil to alternative fuels. As you see in the graph, for now, most of the maritime fuel is based on oil. By 2030 and 2040, LNG will gradually increase, and after 2040, ammonia, e-LNG, and other alternative fuels will take up larger proportion. Commercialization of zero carbon fuel will take place after a very long time, after 2050 maybe. Among zero carbon fuels and low carbon fuels, which fuel would become dominant in the market? It's very difficult to answer this question because we have to consider many elements before choosing a fuel. We have to consider the bunkering infrastructure, price, and carbon emission reduction effect as well. On the table below, you can see the merits and demerits of different fuels. The existing fuel-based oil has superior merits, but they have limitations because in terms of green credentials, LNG is now the most realistically feasible solution. Biofuel, hydrogen, ammonia, and methanol are good in terms of the effect of carbon reduction, but in terms of price, there are a big hurdle we have to overcome. In the future, how will the alternative marine fuel develop? Let's have a look at this from regulatory perspective. First, there is EEDI regulation. EEDI is facilitating the LNG or DF transition among newly built vessels. In the EU, ETS will soon take effect. This will also facilitate the transition towards LNG fuel, and by 2030, if carbon tax rapidly increases, then ammonia as zero carbon fuel may be adopted more actively in the market. But the biggest change is related to fuel maritime regulation, which says that from 2025, low carbon fuel should be applied to vessels, and the penalty level will also increase in the future. So methanol, biofuel, and other alternative fuel will be more actively adopted in the market. And by 2050, various types of fuels will be used through different combinations. On this slide, I will talk about the current status and prospect of eco-friendly fuel ship development. LNG DF ship is currently the most feasible proven solution. In the LNG DF engine, we can take some measures to enhance fuel efficiency and install devices to reduce greenhouse gas emissions further. And LNGDF vessels have the potential to develop into zero carbon vessels. This slide shows various technologies like engine mounted generator and wind assisted propulsion system, which is already being applied or will be applied in the future. Methane slip reduction system, CO2 capture system, and hydrogen carrying system are under development. In the LNG DF system, the most important technology is to reduce methane slip. Methane makes great contribution to greenhouse gas emissions, so it's very important to prevent methane slip. Recently, many engine makers are developing the methane slip reduction technologies. Exhaust gas circulation technology is being used the most frequently. In the case of Hyundai Heavy Industry, through cooperation with other engine manufacturers, we are developing the methane slip reduction technologies. After 2022, we expect that we could roll out this technology in the market. Along with large-scale engine, power generation engine is also important. In power generation engine, we have to reduce methane slip as well. An oxidation catalyst system is usually being used to reduce methane slip. And after 2024, this technology will become commercialized. Next is methanol-fueled ship. Methanol-fueled ship technology is mature, and the only thing that's left is to scale up the methanol-fueled ship. Smoke, sulfur oxide, or nitrogen oxide emissions could be reduced by using methanol-fueled ship. However, methanol itself does not give high effect of carbon emission reduction. In order to enhance the effect of carbon emission reduction, we have to expand the green fuel supply chain in the market. This is the table that shows Musk's strategy for green methanol supply. Musk is trying to supply methanol through its own supply chain. It has the relevant fleet plan. In the case of methanol fueled engine, they are already being mass produced. Hyundai Heavy Industry delivered methanol fueled engine for the first time. Already they delivered 20 sets of methanol fuel engine. The engine is now being applied to 10 megawatt vessels, and from next year, this will be delivered to larger scale vessels. Four-stroke engine has not yet been developed, and we proceeded with the order for four-stroke last year, and this engine will be delivered from 2023. Next is ammonia-fueled ship. Ammonia is carbon-free fuel, but ammonia has toxicity and it has low viscosity. We have to consider this characteristics of ammonia when we design the ship and outfitting system. And it requires an engine technology because ammonia has low ignition point. So Hyundai Heavy Industry is developing toxicity and viscosity reduction system, and we are preparing the full package of ammonia-fueled ship. And by 2025, we plan to deliver ammonia DF gas tanker. This is our current status of ammonia-fueled engine. As for two-stroke, MAN and our company have been developing the two-stroke engine, and in 2025, we will be able to launch ammonia engine. And MAN, Bachela, and Hyundai Heavy Industry are all planning to launch commercial ammonia engine by 2024 or 2025. Conclusion: regulations are becoming stricter, and considering the current fuel development status, we'd like to introduce to you our roadmap. Regulations are changing faster and they're becoming stricter, so we have to respond to the situation more promptly. Not only technological design, but also operational ways need to be diversified. For now, we cannot say that the regulations have no uncertainty. There are still uncertainties in regulations, so we will have to develop the relevant technologies and solutions in a flexible manner. In terms of fuel, by 2040, there will be big changes in the fuel path, so we will have to develop flexible fuel mix technology, and we need to do research on improving fuel efficiency of vessels. And in order to supply carbon-free fuel to the market, shipbuilding industry and other industries should cooperate with each other so that we can supply the relevant product or technology at an affordable price. This is our roadmap for mid to large-sized vessels with alternative fuel. Considering the current infrastructure and level of technology, LNG will, for the time being, remain the main fuel in the market. Although methanol and ammonia-fueled vessels will be appearing in the market, but a small number of ship owners and shipping companies will be able to use zero carbon fuel. And when it becomes possible to use methanol and ammonia fuel at a cheaper price, then we will see more stakeholders adopting methanol and ammonia fuel. So Hyundai Heavy Industry is developing methanol and ammonia fuel technology along with other technologies.
Presentation, it gave us a bigger picture of the change in the shipbuilding market and especially why we need alternative marine fuel. Let's give him another big round of applause. And now let's proceed with our second speaker, who is Sveinung Oftedal, Specialist Director of the Norwegian Ministry of Climate and Environment and Chair of the IMO Intersessional Working Group on Reduction of GHG Emissions from Ships. Let's welcome him with a warm round of applause. And his presentation will be on Introduction to Economic Measures to Incentivize GHG Emission Reduction. The microphone is yours.
Thank you very much. First, I have to say thank you very much to the Ministry of Oceans and Fisheries to invite me to attend this very important conference. And indeed, today I will present the Introduction to Economic Measures to Incentivize GHG Emission Reductions. Let's see. Now, yes, it functions, the technology. Okay, so in looking into the economic measures, we need to take into account that, of course, governments have a wide menu of instruments to use. It is requirements for emission cuts. It is the economic measures, which actually are not only carbon pricing, but also includes grant schemes and a combination of the two, and also measures which can stimulate green finance. Governments can also use investments and finance programs, education programs and R&D programs, and public-private partnerships. Now, in focusing my presentation on the economic measures, I think it is important to look into the various considerations. Okay, back again. Important to look into the various elements to take into account when you design an instrument with economic tools. Is it national or is it international? What do you want to achieve? What actions by the industry is desired? What kind of business models in the industry is the instrument communicating with? And of course, when it comes to instrument, it is also a lot of political aspects. Now, the theory on using economic instrument is that it will launch the cost-effective emission reduction halfway. Where the cost for the reduction is the cheapest, there the measures will be undertaken first. Across borders, across sectors, and of course, if you apply it in shipping, across fleet. That is the theoretical basis for using economic instruments, a cost-effective emission reduction strategy. Now, we all know that, of course, there are various challenges when you develop instruments which are to function across borders and across sectors and across fleet. Now, we can have some examples on what is being undertaken at present. We all have heard about the EU Fit for 55 package. That is a package which is then developed to meet the EU GHG reduction target of 55% by 2030. And what is done in that package is to include more sectors. It is to include also a package of measures, and of course also to increase the use of economic measures. If you exclude some sectors, the other sectors need to cut more, and if you then look into the type of package and the implication of shipping, you will see that they also propose to put price on carbon through the emission trading system, and also they have a proposal to regulate an emission reduction pathway system. So this example is just an illustration that in some regions a wider use of economic instruments is really on the plate and for their decision. What is now the status of carbon pricing internationally? The World Bank is presenting an annual overview on the scale of the use of economic instruments worldwide. And this map is then identifying all the various types of carbon pricing systems which are either in place or in development globally. At present, in 2021, 67% of the revenue from carbon pricing system came from an emission trading system, and 33% came from a carbon tax system. And this will, of course, then develop year by year as governments need to cut emissions further. Now, this have been, I hope this is familiar to you. This is identifying the type of measures shipping can undertake in order to cut emissions. It is energy efficiency improvements, it is control of speed, it is improved logistics, but the main part in decarbonizing shipping is entering into the sustainable fuel transition, which is now the green bar in this graph. And here you have two curves. One is 50% reduction by 2050, and then the other curve is decarbonization by 2050. This is from the latest maritime forecast developed by DNV. Now, the fuel transition, which is also presented in the previous presentation, is of course the most challenging one. Also because it is implying quite significant costs. It is estimated the scale of investments in ships and the scale of investments in fuel production and fuel infrastructure. And looking into the assessment towards 2050, it is estimated that 8 to 28 billion US dollars annually needs to be invested in ships, and 28 to 90 billion dollars annually in fuel infrastructure in order to decarbonize shipping. This is an annual extra investment, meaning it is a quite significant cost implication on going into the fuel transition. Now, coming then towards why economic instruments can play a role, this illustrates the marginal abatement cost for the various types of measures. And you will see that there are some energy efficiency measures which are really a kind of win-win. They are cheap, they have a low cost. And then you have other energy efficiency measures which have a higher cost. And then if you go into the red bar, you can see that the cost is increasing when it comes to the measure. And if you introduce a price on carbon globally, you will see that the amount of measures you will then encompass will be larger. So this is the implication of putting a carbon price, that you will have more measures launched in order to reduce emissions. If you go into another economic scheme like a grant scheme, you also need to take into account that you cannot just provide grants to some sort of investments. You need to take into the full aspects which can realize a fuel transition. This is from a recent example in Norway, where we then supported the ammonia and hydrogen projects, both when it comes to fuel production and fuel demand, meaning support to the fuel production and support to ships which will then run on hydrogen and ammonia. So this transition is now going on in the short sea shipping segment, but it's also very important that an economic instrument is communicating with the real world, meaning that every bit needs to be in place in order to have the transition to happen. So what is the status of economic measures at the IMO? Well, here we are. IMO has actually had that on the agenda since the Assembly adopted the GHG reduction resolution in 2003. And it was a process to develop various approaches for introducing market-based instruments at the IMO. But that process then was suspended in 2013 for various reasons, but member states wanted to take another pathway in order to reduce emissions, so we developed a technical regulatory approach, and at that time suspended discussions until it was then needed to take it up again. So what we have included in the IMO GHG strategy, which has been presented earlier today, is also a list of candidate measures in the short term and mid-term and long term. And also in that strategy, we have recognized that market-based measures is a candidate measures to be developed. And at present, we have then several proposals submitted by member states and observer organizations on using economic instruments to cut emissions, and I will briefly present them. It is a carbon levy, which is proposed by both observer organizations and also member states. It's an emission cap and trade system. It is an international maritime sustainability funding and reward mechanism, which is building upon the existing CII, carbon intensity indicator, where you have which is now coming into force and will be in operation. So building upon that, it is also proposed to have a system where you pay in and you get a reward based on that system. And then it is a zero emission vessels incentive scheme, which is also basing a proposal where you have a carbon price, but also where you have support for the zero emission vessels. And then also we have on the table a proposal for an international maritime research and development board and an IMO maritime research fund. Now, these proposals are under consideration and will be further developed, but they have one thing in common, all of them. It is to establish a price. A price will establish a fund, and when you have a fund, you need to decide what you shall, how the fund shall be used. And so even though the systems they vary in its nature, they have various implications. That is an element they have in common. Carbon price can be introduced on global shipping, can establish a global fund which can provide revenues to climate support or other purposes as to be decided by member states. So among the various issues to resolve in this discussion at the IMO, it is, should a pricing mechanism be based on the total emissions, meaning the actual emissions emitted by ships, or on the basis of an index, like the carbon intensity indicator? Second important element, should the carbon pricing be based on well-to-wake emissions, or only tank-to-wake emissions? We all know that IMO is developing life cycle assessment guidelines. So those two questions have various implications and of course needs to be resolved in further development of economic measures at the IMO. Second, it is then when it comes to carbon pricing, should it be regulated on the certainty of price, meaning like a levy, having then the implications that it is, you can assume the emission reduction, but you cannot, let's say, be certain? Or should it be regulated on the certainty of emission cap, but uncertainty on the carbon price, meaning that you can assume the price, but you can't be certain the price? So that is also illustrated here on the curve, that also for shipping, the variation between actually the cost cap. The cost cap is not constant, it will vary for the various fuels, various ship types, and it will vary in time. You have fluctuations in market price on the various types of fuels, so meaning that actually the cost cap is also fluctuating. So you need then to decide how to close that cost cap, and to which extent an economic measure at the IMO should actually close that cost cap. Because it can also be another purpose to have an economic instrument. This can also be to have climate support and not the main element only to emissions. So this is a very important issue to decide upon. And the third point I have introduced as a very important point is that to what purposes should any funds generated be allocated? Is it to support climate action in the maritime sector, meaning then the full maritime sector, like fuel production, fuel infrastructure, and carbon measures undertaken at ship? Should it be to support measures in developing countries? And should it be only to climate purposes in developing countries, both for mitigation and adaptation? All this is under discussion and needs, of course, in an economic measures when or if the IMO indeed develops that, needs to be decided upon. Trying to change slide. Let's see, here we are. Yeah. Now, the IMO has taken many important decisions the last 3 MEPC meetings. First, when it comes to economic measures, we agreed at the June meeting of the Marine Environment Protection Committee to approve a work plan for the development of mid- and long-term measures, meaning, in other words, the next generation of measures to be considered by the committee. And then it is a timeline that the actually measures to be agreed, we need to decide that in conjunction with the revised GSG strategy on emission reduction of ships. Also, we have decided that indeed the proposal to revise the strategy is initiated, and has been presented also by the Secretary General earlier today. We have a decision by the committee that we are going towards a strengthening of the ambition of the initial strategy. Of course, this is under negotiation, but also in this regard, the committee agreed to initiate now the revision of the initial strategy, and we will have a very important committee meeting this December. Now, when it comes to the type of measures, it is also now accepted that the basket of measures which we are considering, the basket of candidate mid-term measures, the committee endorsed to go forward with that approach. So it is really a very constructive and active process at the IMO. But in order to decide on measures at the IMO, we need to take into account that prior to adoption of any measure, we need to have impact assessment of states before a measure is finally adopted. So this is then a process which is then integrated in the development of measures. So looking into the proposals we have on the table now, we also have initial impact assessment submitted to those proposals. So both when it comes to development of measures and then assessing impact of states, that is an integrated process. And before any decision is taken, of course, we need to have the full understanding of the implication of a measure. Now, I would say that we have indeed a very constructive process ongoing at the IMO. And also when it comes to the proposed candidate economic measures, they are subject to very constructive negotiations. I hope this introduction is providing a better understanding of how economic measures can be used in various parts of the economy and also for shipping in our pathway to decarbonize shipping. Thank you very much for your kind attention.
Thank you very much. Let's hope that these measures will lead to tangible results in cutting emissions from shipping. We also look forward to the debate later on that Mr. Oftedal is going to moderate. Let's give him another big round of applause. And our next presentation will be held by Jin-hyung Kim, part leader of Korea Register. And the presentation is titled Onboard CO2 Capture Technology and IMO GHG Regulatory Framework. Let's welcome him on the stage with a big round of applause.
Good afternoon, everyone. As you introduced, my name is Kim Jin-young. I'm a part leader of KR. Today, I'm going to talk about onboard CO2 capture technology and IMO GHG regulatory framework. So I'm going to talk about what we need to do to encourage OCCS. As you know, international shipping is responsible for 80% of world trade. Among transportation modes, international shipping is the most efficient transportation mode. And international shipping is the industry that is an industry where the national level emission regulation is not applied. So if you look at the bottom of the page, you can see the international shipping is just somewhere between the 6th largest emitter and the 7th largest emitter. So we have this consensus that we need a significant reduction of emissions from the international shipping. And IMO back in 2018 introduced IMO GHG strategy. This is for short and mid and long-term targets and measures. The strategy stipulates that by the middle of this century, specifically by the end of this century, we will achieve zero carbon emission. And we, under the IMO umbrella, we have short-term, mid-term, and long-term measures. And the measure taken in 2018 was called initial strategy. Once it was adopted, IMO, member states of the IMO agreed to revise details of the strategy in the following years. In the latest MEPC meeting, advanced countries agreed to adjust the targets upward, but it hasn't been decided yet. At least there was a suggestion from the developing countries to set higher targets. So this is the overview of the IMO regulations. From EEDI to CII, which will take effect next year, there are many regulations from the IMO. EEDI, EEXI, and CII will be applied based on tank to weight. But IMO, as the previous speaker said, IMO is saying we should consider the emission from the well. So the IMO is trying to introduce the well-to-wake regulations. So ultimately, well-to-wake can be aligned with tank-to-wake. It's one possibility. And there is another possibility. The IMO could adopt a well-to-wake regulation and a separate regulation, which is tank-to-wake regulation. Nothing has been fixed yet. The key point in my presentation is CCUS, carbon capture technology. And CCUS stands for carbon capture, utilization, and storage. CO2 is captured and transferred, and it is used as a resource to create products, or it is stored permanently. And Clarkson published this scenario. This is for emission from ships compared to 2008. By 2050, we are supposed to reduce carbon emission by 50%. And the scenario suggests and presents methods to make the reduction possible. And this scenario doesn't include CCS. And I introduce you the IMO's initial GHG reduction strategy, and there will be a revision of the initial strategy. And we heard a lot about alternative fuels, but it's not the case that we can use all the alternative fuel candidates right away. And international shipping should do something. It cannot sit on its hand. That is why we started developing OCCS. OCCS is an option for shipping companies as a method to reduce greenhouse gas emission from ships. Now you can see the diagram of the carbon capture technology. And it can be split into 3 phases: post-combustion, pre-combustion, oxy-fuel. And in pre-combustion, a fuel is reformed and CO2 is separated. And oxy-fuel capture process involves supply of a fossil fuel to separate air. And post-combustion carbon capture technology is mostly used. And captured CO2 should be separated. We have many methods. One is absorption. Its efficiency is 90%. It is most widely used method, but it requires a source of energy to separate CO2 from air. CO2. Another method is absorption. Its efficiency is more than 85%. It requires a high level of energy. This is a disadvantage of this method. And membrane separation and cryogenic distillation are other options for CCS. As I said earlier, post-combustion capture is most widely used, and this is the process layout of carbon capture technology. Exhaust gas includes SOx and NOx. And these materials and chemicals contribute to reducing the efficiency of separation of CO2 to increase the amount of CO2, captured CO2. We have to reduce exhaust gas. Exhaust gas goes through the quench tower, it goes to the absorption tower, and observed CO2, and observed observed CO2, and then it moves to evaporator in order to separate CO2 gas from observants. We use observants, and the resulted chemicals will go to the oxygen tower, and we use dryer to dehydrate the materials, and then finally the CO2 is just stored. We have seen a number of projects using carbon capture technologies. One example is in Japan. K-Line and Mitsubishi Shipbuilding used amine absorption, and they tried a demonstration at sea, and Vasila used retrofittation of Vasila did full-scale retrofit installation, and it is doing a project to use CCS for LPG fuel ships. And there is another project using cryogenic distillation. In this process, dry ice was used. This is a very innovative project. So now we had our basic understanding of carbon capture technology. Once CCS is on board, we have to ask ourselves whether it will be effective enough. To tell you the conclusion first, for now, EED, EEDI, CII, EEXI, in other words, we cannot meet the requirements of EEDI and EEXI and CII. As you can see, the formulas are the same, but there is no space for CCS to be recognized in this formula. But if you look at the LCA guideline based on well to wake, tank to wake emission formula will exclude captured CO2 from ships. And I have demonstrated the IMO regulations, and you can see the overview of the OCCCS and IMO regulations. It cannot be applied to tank to wake, but this OCCCS can be applied to well to wake. So there is no consistency. That is the biggest challenge. So the Korean government made a suggestion to the IMO. The suggestion was about integrating captured CO2, the so-called OCCS emission reduction, into tank to wake basis. At MEPC 78, Korea will continue to argue the importance of CCS, and it was already decided MEPC 78 will discuss OCCS. Just depending on the results of MEPC 78, Korea decided to submit 2 documents to MEPC 79. One is about tank to wake regulations and well to wake regulations, and there is a discrepancy between the two. So Korea will continue to argue that OCCS should be included in tank to wake regulations. And role of IMO is to encourage innovation and efficiency and to create a level playing field. And IMO's regulations do not force specific regulations to be applied. And IMO regulation is goal-based regulation. So the Korean government believes that OCCS should be included to tank to wake regulations. In the 3 major shipyards in Korea, they have been spending time and make investment on OCCS. Now you can see the examples of the 3 shipyards, and the information documents from the 3 shipyards will be submitted to the MEPC meeting in the near future. Maybe some may say it is too early to consider OCCS, but the Korean government believes it's not too early because we already have a project using OCCS. These are the conclusion. To use OCCS, there are many challenges to overcome. One of the challenges is to make sure the OCCS is recognized as a measure to reduce greenhouse gas and CO2, the IMO's regulation. The second challenge is once the CO2 is captured and stored in ships, we have to expect a space penalty on ship. And space matters for ships because ships exist for the purpose of transportation. So we need new technologies to overcome the limitation of a space penalty. And we also have to consider energy penalty to operate OCCS. Lastly, even if CO2 is captured on board, we are not supposed to discharge and release the captured CO2. So we have to store the captured CO2 temporarily on board and release that on ports. That means port needs infrastructure to receive onboard captured CO2. And ports may either transport the captured CO2 to other facilities to use that as a source for manufacturing, or to transport it to a utilization facility. That's all I have. Thank you for listening.
Thorough presentation and also for the interesting strategies, the potential realistic strategies in the near future. Let's give Mr. Kim another big hand. And up next, let me introduce Han-Sun Park, Director and Research Fellow of Korean Maritime Institute, who will speak on global efforts, IMO GHG strategy. Let's welcome him with a big round of applause.
Thank you for my introduction. And today I would like to speak in English. Today is my presentation. The subject is the IMO greenhouse gas mitigation and strategy and international governance. And so I would like to speak out the focus in the view of due diligence and implementation of a reduction strategy and energy transitions. Yeah, this is my content. Is I follow up to what is the starting point for climate change. It's a responding in needs to we need to respond to the climate change. Why? Why we are response to the climate change? The following of the UN Sustainable Development Goal and the IMO strategy. And then I would like to introduce what is the difference between the UN FCCC and IMO MAPL conventions. We are very well known to the United Nations Framework Climate Change Convention. This is a framework convention. It's different to the method of implementation of the conventions in comparison with the MAPL conventions. The third is National Action Plan and Governance. The small island developing state and least developing state, and even the Korea, how to make national action plans in efficiently, in taking into considerations energy efficiency, energy saving, even support to the business sector. We have two considerations, the private sector and public sector. That is, both of them is very important. So that I would like to my concept and my idea through my research. And then would like to sectoral approach. Is the approach, the strategy is different to the private sector and public sector. Even the business is the port logistics and the shipping industry and the ship equipment manufacturers is different to strategy approach to the climate change. I think so. That finally the conclusions. Okay, you know very well what is the UN Sustainable Development Goals. This is a 17th development goal. What is the directly related to the climate change, climate response to the around nowadays to our country or all over the world is very big, serious, the climate change. Even some countries, the climate change response is their survival matter. We are very well known in the international community. And the discussion about the response to making rules and regulation in the International Maritime Organization and the United Nations Framework Climate Change Conventions, the kind of the meeting. The 13, the climate action is very important. This is some people say that the climate action is earning the money in their own business. Some people say that. Previous speaker already introduced there are many technical development related to how to respond to the climate change. Today, I would like to mention about to take into considerations in the modern technical sector. I would like to introduce and the policy sector is very important. The previous times to the technologies is support to the policy. Now is a policy, how to make a goal. We also the IMO 2018 and we adopted to the IMO initial strategy in 2030, 2050. We, any flag state, any business sector, ship have to get the target to the 40% 2030. How to implement, how to make connections to response. However, now we also there is no to the 40% the technology independently, one technology. How to harmonize, how to make the corporations to harmonize to the technology. The policy is leading the technology, I think. There are many, the climate change reduction activity is all over the world nowadays. And so in terms of the protection of the global, the nations, and especially we have to take into consideration how to respond, how to make the national action plans, which is supported by the developed country. And so, first time, so when we make to the strategic direction of IMO, we take into consideration is 24 trans development challenge item. And so, there is some people to come together working to make the IMO strategic direction from 2018 to 2023. Now is the 2023 is the last the year. Next year is closing to this strategy. I am also to the next step to make the new strategic directions after the 2023. To the strategic direction, the 7. And so the first one is to make to the implementation of IMO Convention, how to make a regulatory framework. This is the first priority for the International Maritime Organization. And then next is very important to the technology development. And so IMO rules have to take into consideration is the development of technology. Today, in the terms of the energy saving and to the emission reduction, the technology. And so the climate change is the best priority of the IMO, the strategic directions. We are ready for next step after the 2023. And so next one, what is the issue? What is the problem? To the United Nations Framework Climate Change Convention is the Article 3, the principle. The principle is common but differentiate responsibility and respectively capability. It's absolutely is taken into consideration a different responsibility is required to the international community. However, until now, to the IMO Convention is the non-discriminations, no more favorable treatment agreement, How to harmonizations when we talk about, when we discussion on the market-based mechanism. It's respectively on board ships is until now according to the IMO Convention, is the same rule, same standards application is enough. However, I think the governance is a little bit change is required, is to harmonization, to make the market-based mechanism. The market-based mechanism, the basically concept is to the differentiate. We are to take into consideration different the consideration, the principle, and application. However, the ship company, they don't have no experience to the different applications. So long time, as my experience, when I discussion about to the market-based mechanism, 2008, 2009, 10. At the times, so the principal conflict is very big problems. Maybe I think it is who are the wisdom to resolve to this principal conflict. Maybe that person is almost, I call to the wisdom person. I call to the wisdom person to make solutions between the UNFCCC principle and the IMO Convention principle. However, I think it is more and more the industry and the government maybe might be to considering of the principle of the common body differentiated responsibility. I think so. Maybe we are to have to consideration the SIDS and LDCs. That is, as I call, to the due diligence and the responsibility of fragile state. I think so. Next one is already previous speakers. What is the implementation method of UNFCCC and the MAPOL? UNFCCCs, to the framework conventions. That is why we make a Kyoto Protocol and the Paris Agreement, the climate action plan we need. And so, the last year, to the COP26, also the many company and the international community announced to the green corridor in terms of the emission zero shipping route. We need now times. Maybe I think so it's possible to approach 2025 is enough to take into consideration the development of technology related to the environment, eco-friendly ships, to digitalization ages. Okay, that is our solution. And so that is why I am the first things is the rules and target leading the technology development. I mentioned before. There are many methods of implementation of IMO, the MAPOL Annex 6. The EEDI, EEXI, and CII, and market-based mechanism. And so the kind of how to approach. Maybe nowadays it's IMO and the Republic of Korea is progressing to the greenhouse gas smart program. The invitation for the SIDS, the high officials, and this developing states high official was invited in this time. And so the kind of the technical transfer model is have to develop more and more. That is why we are collecting to the technical cooperation and technical cooperation division of the IMO seriously taking into considerations to many the development of project. I think those maybe today's vice minister or the president of KMI and the Ministry of Ocean and Fishery fully support to develop to the kind of the project. I think so. There is a solutions to approach method of our in these times. Okay, why a national action plan in this? This concepts, national action plan, to how to make a national action plan. It is important. National action, according to the national action plan, and so maybe I would like to recommend to the law of their own countries for the small island developing state and listed developing countries. According to the national action plan, they can contain to the many aspect, many concept, and then implementation plan in terms of the sectoral approach. I think it's finance matter, I think is the technology matter. I think is the capacity building matter, policy making part. The kind of the stakeholder need to be the cooperations by the stakeholder. That is why we are understand to the national action plan. This is I think is a governance. The national action plan, how to make a national action plans depends on the national action plan. This maybe I think is a very efficiency approach to response to climate change. I think so. And so maybe we also to the according to the national action plans to the member participants joined to the greenhouse gas program, GHG Smart program, maybe more detailed approach to the IMO, the homepage site, and then our textbook and approach the Googling. However, that is why we need to the national plan as and needed to understanding that. So, next one is I didn't see the very small the letter. However, as I before is there are many the sectoral approach, sectoral considerations items. We have to remember the stakeholders to the harmonize to the in this sectoral approach, sectoral development. So another one is to the sectoral approach is important to in terms of the shipping, port, and states, etc. And so shipping and shipyard have to consider the energy transition. Already previous speaker mentioned about it. However, I would like to recommend two the strategic approach. One is in this time. Right now, what kind of fuel oil for business is efficiency, the energy saving, the method. Now we know to the gas, marine, the gas oil is nowadays can use to the marine gas oil. Taking into consideration is infrastructures. LNG is more in these times useful for the business right now. However, is two track. One is right now. Another one is in the future. At least I would like to consider to make a policy of the shipping company. And so the 5 years track. One is a 10 years track. Maybe next to the alternative fuel oil is what is the useful for the company. And so the ammonia or methanol or like another solution, hydrogen. And so right now we have to the infrastructure and consider the supply chain. There is no supply chain. And so the company do not take into considerations. And so this is also the IMO field to the shipping and shipyard have to consider the energy transitions. And so the life cycle assessment is an important effect to nowadays. And so we also approach to the life cycle of zero and the low commissions marine fuel, as we know. The kind of the chain and category, we also in terms of their own strategy, it's very important for approaching things. Sector approach is the previous speakers is ammonia, hydrogen, maybe methanol. What is important to take into consideration is time to 2025, 2030, and 2050. Maybe next speaker in detail explanation. Also, this is also the step, the short-term, mid-term, and long-term, we need it. CII already mentions, is sectoral approach in terms of the port. And so the alternative marine the power is absolutely is to remove the territorial matter of the port area. AMP is now is a very useful method of the removing the port CO2 and particularly matter. And so this is a time schedule of IMO. This is my conclusions. And so, as I mentioned before, my summary is rules and target are leading the technology development, I think so. And then how to make implementations method in terms of the implementation of UNFCCC and the IMO Convention. That is my homework, is the conflict principle between the UNFCCC and the IMO Convention. So I would like to recommend to the final stage is National Action Plan. And then the finance matter, regulation matter, research and development matter, infrastructures. They're all the sectoral approach. However, is lead to the collaborations, cooperations, interrelationships among these 5 categories, I think so. That is my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Park. Your presentation underlined why we need to talk about GHG strategies in cooperation with the world to tackle climate change. Let's give Mr. Park another big round of applause. And now we have come to the 5th presentation. It's great to see everyone is listening in deep interest despite it being late in the afternoon. And I'm going to introduce now Zabi Bazari, Managing Director of Energy and Emission Solutions, who's going to speak about alternative fuels for maritime decarbonization. Let's welcome him with a huge round of applause.
Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. Thank you very much for that introduction. I would like very much to thank the organizer of this Maritime Week for inviting the GHG Smart project participants to this meeting. You have heard about GHG Smart a few times. I would like to give you a little bit more information before I deliberate on my discussion. This is a major, at the present time, 4-year project, which is funded by Republic of Korea and implemented by the IMO. And the main aim is to make capacity building for small island developing countries and least developing countries. I'm very pleased to say that we have got big delegations from these countries present here, and I'm sure they will note that whatever we give them during the training are of current interest to the industry as well. And my topic of discussion is alternative fuels, and you have been hearing about it, I presume, from the morning. When I came here about before lunchtime, the speakers were speaking in Korean. I didn't know that there is translation, and the only thing I could understand was LNG, biofuels, etc., etc. So I could say that everybody has been talking about it, and maybe I would not add too much value, but I promise you I'm going to give you a different perspective of the subject. My presentation goes in this order. First of all, a little bit of introduction. I will skip it because many people have talked But then I'm going to talk about different alternative fuels and heavily concentrate on fuel transition pathways. So my concentration is not too much on technology, but it is on the pathways and where we are heading. And eventually talk about a little bit of comparison between these alternative fuels with conclusions. In terms of introduction, you already know about IMO GHGS strategy and their 50% targets. There are debates that this target may be even more ambitious when they decide on the revised strategy in 2023. Also, you have heard that if we are going to reduce GHG emissions and achieve the IMO targets, we have got only 3 areas to concentrate. One is operational management of the ship. The second one is technology of the ship. And the third one is the fuel. The only thing we need to understand is that the first 2 are in the hand of the maritime industry. The third one is out of the hand of the maritime industry. But it doesn't mean we should not debate it. Fuel needs to be supplied by the energy industry to the maritime industry. According to my estimates, if IMO keeps the current level of ambitions, which is 50%, I guess that by 2050, we should get rid of the 50% of the fossil fuels that we are using now. So that's a rough figure, and the challenge would be huge. What are really the alternatives? In terms of primary energy that you can see on the left side of the diagram, we have got 3 options. The first option is fossil fuels. The second option is biomass. And the third option is electricity. There isn't anything else. So when we think about it, these are the 3 items there. On the right-hand side, you see the blobs there. And we are talking about the shipboard application. On the shipboard application, you have got also 3 cases. The first case is what we call liquid fuel pathways. The second phase is the gaseous fuel pathways. And the third one, I say it is a hybrid pathways. And by hybrid, it means any of the first 2 plus electricity. Okay. So those are the 2 things. You may say, or you may ask that how we go from the first column, which are the primary fuel, to the end column, which is the final fuel. To be honest, you can see the lines. Those lines could go everywhere. There are a lot of chemical, physical, biological type of processes you could go through and change everything to everything. Let's put it this way. Everything from the first column could change to everything on the last column, okay? So that's basically the pathway. The important is what I have written down there, that the pathways based on source of energy are fossil-based, biomass-based, and electric-based. We don't have anything else. When we are going to look at these different pathways, we need to do analysis, of course. Without analysis, we cannot decide. The first one is life cycle analysis, and many talked about it. In shipping, we refer to it as well to basically tank, which comes to the shipping. That's the supply chain. And then from the tank to the wake, it is something which is happening on the ship itself. For me, as an engineer, the second, that right-hand side is important, and that is the technology readiness line, okay? And technology readiness of the various technology proposals. And as you can see there, it has got 3 steps. The first step is the research. The second step is development. And the third stage is deployment. When we talk about these kind of things, we are interested to a large extent on the deployment, especially policymakers would be interested on that subject, where we are on deployment to make the right policy. In addition to those, of course, we have got economic analysis, etc., that needs to be taken into account. The main pathways, I would say, the first one is fossil-based fuels, and that is conventional fuels, fossil fuel pathways, the one we have got it now. It is black pathway, it is high carbon, and today I would say almost about 99% we are there. So you could see the task of decarbonization and away from fossil fuel, how big it is, because now 99% is there. Technology, of course, is already, and gaseous fuels have slightly less emissions as compared to liquid fuels, and of course they are cleaner. That's why we are going there. The second pathway is fossil fuel-based synthetic fuels, and that basically means anything like methanol, ammonia, and hydrogen that you have been talking about. That could come from the fossil fuels. I call that as black pathways. If you ask me, I would say it is blacker than the other pathway as far as the greenhouse gas emissions. So we have got light black, dark black. So it is important to realize that. The next pathway is still fossil fuel, but we have got this carbon capture technology that I think it was Mr. Kim or somebody who talked about it. Okay? If we get the carbon capture technology, then we would get to these blue pathways. The enabling technology there would be the carbon capture technology, and I commend the Koreans who have started work on that. Also, I personally favor basically onshore carbon capture compared to offshore carbon capture. But nevertheless, it is a commendable activity. Then we go into the biofuel pathway. Again, we have got a lot of resources as feedstock, and then we got a different type of final fuel there. I know that diagram is too much, the number of words are too much, don't pay attention to it. But be aware that there are great issues with biofuels, especially we call generation 1, which is coming from basically food crops, no good. And then generation 2, they are coming from plants and forestry, etc., and non-crop. We are looking for breakthrough there again. We are waiting for a breakthrough on generation 3, which hopefully would come from especially engineered, basically, crop. There are a little bit of regulatory gaps there, which needs to be addressed. But overall, my personal view is that global production of biofuels would be limited, no matter what, unless we have got a big breakthrough in terms of production of energy sort of crops for biofuels. So it would be limited, and we would be, maritime would be competing definitely with the aviation there, because aviation needs biofuels more than even us. Then we go to the zero carbon renewable electricity pathway. And this is really the things that most of us, when we talk about hydrogen, ammonia, methanol, we mean this one, okay? And it is the ideal pathway for the future if we could produce enough renewable energy. If we get renewable electricity, the main base fuel would be hydrogen. And then the hydrogen could be converted to ammonia could be converted to methanol or any other hydrogen carrier fuels. Large-scale production technology of hydrogen is still not there. So I have put the technology readiness level at 7 to 8, and also significant future production potentials we have there. And it is the most advocated pathway by many, including policymakers. In fact, they love it as long as the technologies, etc., they could provide renewable electricity. The last pathway is hybrid battery electric pathway. It means all previous pathways you can consider, including the renewable hydrogen, okay, which was cleanest. At this time, you provide electricity to the ship. This is direct electrification, and it is very important for shipping. Direct electrification technology is at 7 to 8 because already cars are working on that. So technology adaptation for ships could be accelerated quite fast. And the main constraint is really battery technology. Of course, we have got a lot of other technical issues, but they are small. The main one is the battery in terms of size, capacity, and so on. And in my view, this pathway will take over from all other pathways in the long-term future, not short-term future, in the long-term future. Now, a little bit about how you compare these different alternative fuels. And this diagram is a very useful one. It is developed by DNV in 2020. I looked at it and I said, it is still valid. Why not put it up? And as you can see, there are some different type of alternative fuels. It doesn't have anything to do with conventional fuel, okay? It is all alternative fuel. The only fuel which is there is LNG, but no liquid fossil fuel there. And you can see where they are on that one. Generally, I could say that the better fuels that we have in mind still are on the left side most of the time, which is, it's not available, infrastructure is not there, cost is high, this and that and that. And the ones which we don't like from greenhouse gas, they are on the right-hand side. And by that one, I mean, for example, LNG even, okay? Because long term, we don't like LNG as well. There has been a case study done by a couple of consultancy companies in Hamburg. I know them, and according to their estimates, they have done it for Mega Max 24 class. It is a container ship with 24,000 TEU, and they have done a comparison of cost, okay? And this diagram shows that if you go for different pathways, you will have different costs. Again, if I want to give you a summary, would be that the cost associated with those which are available now, it seems to be, according to their estimate, LNG is the preferred option for the current phase. And if you go for biomass, the cost would be significantly higher by more than 2 times. And if you go for methanol or ethanol from electricity, etc., it would be even higher, okay? But the band and uncertainty there is. So in terms of cost and economy of the fuel, it was covered by few speakers. This study and case study also shows the same. The same study shows that if you are going to reduce the shipboard CO2, still the LNG would be the best option at the present time, until you get to what we call renewable electricity e-fuels. And those are the one on the right-hand side, okay? Those, it would drop. So this is what reflects the IMO current approach and policy, that they just take into account the carbon which is produced on board ships. They don't look at the full life cycle. So according to that, LNG is preferred, and that's why many people still invest on that front. Just one slide on a policy aspect for accelerating fuel transition. Essential activities to accelerate maritime fuel transition to 2050 would include, first of all, the production. And of course, the production, I would see it as a kind of integrated, cooperative, global production. And it is out of the hand of the IMO and maritime industry. It doesn't mean that they cannot support it. They can definitely support it through policy making, etc. But they are not responsible for that. When it comes to shipboard-oriented developments, there is a need for having much more R&D funding for support of shipbuilders, shipboard application, port system development. There is a need for policy support in closing the regulatory gaps. We have got still a lot of regulatory gaps if we are going to move from current fuels to future fuels, especially the ones which IMO has got on their agenda, for example, whether to stick to the current policy of only looking at the ship or to go for the life cycle. And finally, financial incentives for first-time movers. So finance, MBM, as discussed by Mr. Oftedel, is part and parcel of the whole thing. You can't have cheap fossil fuels and then advocate maybe advanced new fuels. And that's also to do with the market and competition to adjust that. So conclusions, by 2050, shipping would transition to low and zero carbon fuels by 50% non-fossil fuel, while the other 50% will still be fossil fuel. If IMO tightens the grip on this through revised strategy, that number should go higher. The main contenders to replace fossil fuels are biofuels at limited scale. Okay? Plug-in electric hybrid ship at limited scale using grid electricity starting from 2025. I could see potential for that, but it wouldn't be for ocean-going ships. But definitely there are many ships which are going shorter routes. They could benefit from that. Low carbon capture-based fuels. If we get technology of carbon capture on shore, that would help us to go for blue solutions, okay? Blue fuels. And e-fuels starting from 2030. Eventually, by the end of this century, e-fuels would take over. Life cycle analysis is very important, especially sustainability aspects. A lot of issues with sustainability. We should not take it for granted that, oh, hydrogen is a good fuel. There are a lot of sustainability issues. IMO policy making is, of course, essential, and some sort of financial policy would be needed there. And I would end my presentation at this point. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Bazari, for that different perspective and the thorough explanation of the main pathways of fuel. Let's give him another big round of applause. Now let's move on with our next presentation, which will be by Fabio Bellini, Assistant Professor of World Maritime University. And this presentation will be on port decarbonization trends and challenges or circular economy approaches in the port and maritime sector toward energy efficiency. Let's welcome him with a huge round of applause.
Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. Thank you very much. Before to start my presentation, I would like to spend a word about the GHC Smart project. The project to be here to benefit. You can see around there are several let's say participants from around the world. And I'm sure that this also will help also to make fruitful this discussion. And just a few words, the GHC Smart project aim to, let's say, to build a maritime training program to support implementation of the IMO GHC strategy by capacity building action for the least developing country, LDC, and also small island developing states. And the project is funded by the Republic of Korea and implemented by IMO. So that's, I think, it's an important part of that. Today, my presentation will focus on the ports. Up to now, we had a very interesting presentation about how ships can support the shipping decarbonization, and I try to focus with my presentation how ports can support decarbonization and what are the different trends and challenges. As you can see that ports are important nodes, right, are between the ships and also the inland, the city, and they are very crucial infrastructure. And also the key, one of the key role in terms of global supply chain. And as you can see how ports, a lot of goods are movement around the ports, and also means that a lot of activity are carried out by ports, movement of cargo, passengers, and discharge and charge container ship. And this also represent one of the important part in terms of decarbonizing the port sector, because all these activity can produce the so-called also externality, negative externality, that can, as also highlight my previous colleague, most of the ports are very close to the city. So this also means that this negative externality affect the city residential, and therefore it's important that also port put in place measure, policy, and strategy in order to cut down and reduce the GHG emission, but also the other pollutant emission like particulate matter, volatile compound, SOx, and NOx. We also know that ports are the intersection of many development, right? And this also means that ports are complex units. Ports also are complex by the government. You have different kind of governance of ports. Right? So ports can be governed by public ports, or let's say semi-public, or landlord port. And this also can have an important impact in terms of implementing strategy, measure, in order to support the decarbonization of the shipping sector. This is an important items, an important action to take into consideration, because again, when we talk about ports, we have different stakeholders. And this is stakeholder, it's really important to involve them in the participatory process and also in the decision process. I would say that, according to my experience, is one of the most challenging to sit together with all the relevant stakeholders that can be internal or external stakeholders. So that is an important pillar to consider. And then also, we can also say that ports are also a significant positive effect of the national economy. If a port is competitive, this also will benefit from the region and for the rest of the supply chain. Is also just to, let's say, link with the previous presentation. We saw there is a huge development in terms of alternative fuels and renewables energy that impact the ships. But these have also an important impact to port, because let's say sustainable shipping require also sustainable port. If you just think infrastructure, we talk about LNG. LNG need also that port are capable and able to accommodate the bunkering of LNG. Also, I hear from my colleague, Dr. Park, he mentioned OPS, offshore power supply. Is especially in Europe, there is a huge wave of implementation of OPS. Is also due to the regulation factor. This also had an important push for port, right, to provide infrastructure in order to accommodate vessels to, let's say, plug in with electricity infrastructure. So this just to show that the ports, the trends of port is in line with the trends of the shipping sector. So we need that these different segments talk each other and in order to boost the global supply chain. Here, as I mentioned before, just to highlight how it's important to put in place policy and strategy in order to cut down the so-called negative externality. As I mentioned in my previous slides, several externalities can be produced from the port operation. The most important is air pollution, but also you have a noise pollution. So all these negative externality can be mitigated and also through policy and action. And in the next figure, you can see the different scope, because it's also important to understand what are the externality, the air pollution that is produced by the port, but also what are, let's say, the different interface. As I mentioned before, port is in the middle. Also, important negative externality can be produced by the city congestion, right? So that is important to have, again, I will stress again the point, the stakeholder involvement, right? When you let's say try to develop a port policy, is important also to understand what are the urban planning and how this can be let's say put together in a more proactive and efficient way. So I would say that when we talk about port, green port or ecological ports, it's important that the three pillars are together: shipping, port, and city. So that is is also an important part, because we see also the tendency, for instance, for the ports to move out from the city. This is also due to the regulation, right? But also due to stakeholder, because the, let's say, the environmentalists, the residential inhabitant have a huge power in terms to influence the decision. So that is also happening in Europe, but I would say around the world, to move out from the city, perhaps to build a better infrastructure that improve the connectivity. Connectivity is another important keyword. We can spend a lot of time about connectivity and also how to measure, right? And also how to improve the link between the different actors from the global supply chain. Here, just an example of number. What are the measures for the different ports around the world? Long Beach, Los Angeles, and Gothenburg, Vancouver. Just to give you an idea how globally the ports try to put in place measure in order to reduce the negative externality, but then to be more efficient. So I would say that the energy efficiency and reduction of negative externality can go hand to hand. Okay. This is just to give a full picture of the different key element of seaport. As you can see, I let's say put the city, that I think it's an important node, the logistic infrastructure, but also the energy infrastructure is also another important pillar. So that's it's an important pillar in order to build the flow of information and also the different activity along the supply chain. What is the transport network, connectivity between the different mode of transport for ports and city? As you can see, as also highlighted before, ports are really the hub of the energy hubs. port are also the hub of the different activity that bring the economic growth from the region. Here, just to highlight the different stakeholders that are involved. As you can see, the Port Authority, also the design and the layout of the port itself, and the different, let's say, pillar. One size doesn't fit all. Ports are different. Even if you take it to port with a similar governance, but perhaps are different, let's say, trends, geographical position. So each port are unique and need, let's say, a proper policy that is a link in a global context. So this also bridge to my, let's say, next topic, the so-called green shipping corridor. As I highlighted before, ports are unique, but in order to, let's say, to support and, let's say, highlight this greening of the shipping sector, it's important that the ports link each other, they don't stand alone, right? And also, port has to be linked with the shipping sector, but also to the inland sector. So the development of the green shipping corridor, it's quite important. It's quite in line. How we can build, let's say, a green shipping corridor? I would say the first important, a crucial pillar is stakeholder commitment. So you need to have a stakeholder commitment along the whole supply chain. So that is the first warm-up, I would say, the first exercise in order to build up this global strategy, global corridor. But also, I would say the availability of zero-emission fuel, right, along the bunker infrastructure service and also along the corridor. So you need to have an infrastructure in terms of fuel availability in order to build the, let's say, the green shipping corridor. But also, above all, policy and regulation. So that is also another, it's incentive. The policy incentivizes the process of a green shipping corridor. And there are already some discussion about the green shipping corridor. For instance, one between Rotterdam and Singapore, but also Chile is working on that direction. There are, as far as I know, several projects and let's say policy that are building on this direction. But also let's say we need to promote demand. We need to have a demand to green emission, so greening the sector, right? So we need to attract, right, this mechanism, perhaps through, as my colleague before, the previous speaker, incentives, right, that they can support and boost the green. It's a really important concept that links, and I would like to stress that in order to don't think silos, support should be linked along all the supply chain. And here I just plot some of the trends on green transition. I would say that regulation uncertainty can also can be considered a barrier if you look globally. So it's also important that the different stakeholders have a common understanding of the regulation, right? And also a common action on that. But also there are another challenge, the electrification of ports, right? We experience an increasing demand of electrification. So in the future, one of the main challenges to port is to provide the energy that it needs. If you think about cold ironing, we talk about electric ferry. So it means that ports, the trend of energy need for ports is increasing. So this has become one of challenge of port himself. And I would say also space for building those infrastructure, because some port doesn't have too much space. So this also could be also how the port can expand or move or create some dry port along the supply chain. But also another topic I think it's quite interesting, at least to mention, the circular energy transition. Ports are on the middle of the supply chain. So I do firmly believe they can activate the circular transition in order to reuse the material as much as possible. One stream that is, let's say, port, there are few examples around Europe and the world, for instance, waste to energy. How to use the waste from ships to produce energy. So that is also activate the so-called industrial symbiosis between ship, port, but also city, because perhaps port can also produce energy and, let's say, sell to the city or vice versa. So this is also another stream that is it's a quite particular interest. And then the last point is also, as I mentioned before, port governance can influence the different strategy, energy strategy for port, right? Because if you are landlord port, perhaps you can, let's say, you lease some infrastructure, and then you don't have the full control in terms of energy management system of that infrastructure. So that this could be considered a sort of a weakness on the part. Yeah, as I highlighted before, some of the major barriers in order to decarbonize the port, lack of finance, lack of government support, uncertainty about future regulations, especially for waste stream, I would say. Different port business. What is the right business model in order to promote the greening from the port? This is another huge topic, and I hope that will be some discussion on that. A lack of training and managerial experience, I would say, but also technical issue. So innovation is also an important pillar of that. Here is just to summarize what I mentioned before is a recent paper that we published. And as you can see, we highlight what are the different policy tools, right? Incentives and grants, tariff charge, market-based measure, as I mentioned also during the opening session, and also port incentive. And here I try to also divide what can be the different measure, right, that can be applied in port in order to improve efficiency and cut down the negative externality. I would say one of the important measure, in my opinion, is to have in place an energy management system, because the energy management system give you an overall and also allow the port authority and the different let's say actor involved in the port authority to understand their own flow of energy, right? Because they force the company to monitor it constantly, the energy flow of the different technical and operational measures, and then also allow the port authority to intervene promptly in order to, let's say, reach the target and objective. Yeah, we can also say that port can contribute to energy transition. Port are important producer and provider of a clean energy solution, are the key player in the blue economy. Port are hubs for the circular economy. Port are committed to strengthen the port-city relationship. But I also would like to highlight that port are also the place for production of let's say, energy, consuming energy, but also to transition to energy. Here I will just keep true is the what European Green Deal and for 55 is also been discussed previously to my colleague. Just a recap slide. And this I want to just give a figure in terms of let's say state of play for energy imports. As you can see, this is a report prepared by the European Seaport Organization that is the grouping the major port in Europe, and you can see the different percentage of, let's say, energy sources in ports. There is let's say, a tendency in increasing on wind energy, right? Even if they measure the rest of also based on fossil fuel. So there is still space for improvement. And this is the current infrastructure availability. And perhaps I want to conclude with this example. I think it's a good best practice to show in terms of port. The European Seaport Organization developed the so-called EcoPorts label. And under the EcoPort labels, they developed this port environmental review system. I think it's a quite good best practices because it's developed by port for port. So taking into consideration the needs of the port, and is based on the PDCI cycle, plan, do, check, and act on the ISO 14001 standard. And to conclude, I would say that we need to find the right combination of thematic pillars and measure, but also funding research and developing innovation is an important part. And also the mindset change and paradigm shift, right? As I mentioned before, also the circular process, circular economy process is an important driver. Global collaboration among all the stakeholders, it's a crucial. And also alignment for port-related and connecting activity for the capacity. So building infrastructure is able to fulfill the needs of the capacity. And life cycle perspective and energy maritime supply chain. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Bellini. So it's not only about fuel and ships, but also the ports that are home to these ships that may have to undergo changes to remain sustainable. Thank you for bringing up that topic. Let's give Mr. Bellini another big round of applause. And now we should have come to the last presentation. Yes, we have. We have come to the last but not least presentation by Hee-jin Kang, Senior Director of Korea Research Institute of Ships and Ocean Engineering, who has prepared a presentation on strategies to build domestic alternative fuel production and supply infrastructure. Let's welcome him with a big round of applause.
안녕하세요.
Good morning, everyone. I'm the last speaker of today's session, so I'm going to be very brief so that you can enjoy the night in Busan. Today, I'd like to talk about eco-friendly fuels and how we can address the challenges regarding supply chain of eco-friendly fuels. I think you must be familiar with this picture. The GHG regulations, the initial strategy for that was introduced and revision will be available soon. It's important to note that Korea has a strength in the shipbuilding industry and Europe has many shipbuilders. And this revision of regulation will have a great impact on Korean shipyards and shipbuilders as well as European shipbuilders. Now you are seeing considerations of alternative fuels and research status. Let's take a look at the pictures of ships at the bottom. Auto sail and optimization of hull form have been listed as breakthrough technologies, but these technologies will not be enough to meet the regulations. So we have to discuss how we are going to expand the use of alternative fuels. As you know, for now, we won't be able to use alternative fuels like ammonia and hydrogen to fuel ships because there could be many issues regarding environment and education and training and fuel supply. And zero carbon fuels are still facing technical challenges and barriers. To address those barriers, we have to think that there won't be any single alternative fuel that will address all the problems. We may have to combine different alternative fuels to meet our target and goals. We are discussing many different technologies, and the success of the technologies will depend on how they will be integrated or considered for calculation of EEXI and CII and EEDI. So we have to think about how the amount of captured CO2 will be considered for the formulas of CII, EEXI, and EEDI, and how we are going to consider combinations of alternative fuels for EEXI, EEDI, and CII. And this may bring about different perspectives and even debates between different countries. In Korea and other research organizations in other countries have been researching hull form optimizations and air bubble lubrication. As you know, even if we combine all these new technologies, there are still barriers. For example, there is a margin of error plus or minus 5% between model ships and actual ships. So that means we need new propulsion systems. It is true that there is a global commitment and efforts to address these issues. Korea has been focused on eco-friendly technologies such as LNG propulsion system. If you use LNG propulsion system compared to heavy oil, you can reduce at least 20% of greenhouse gas emission. E-fuel in synthetic natural gas or SNG, they can be combined to reduce up to 50% of greenhouse gas emission. And CCS is another technology that deserves our attention, according to some people. And these new technologies, as you heard before, their success will depend on how they will be considered for calculation of EEXI, EEDI, and CII. And we may have to consider the methanol technologies introduced by Maersk recently. I'd like to talk about ammonia and methanol. Ammonia is a zero carbon fuel, so you may imagine and think that if you use ammonia, if you create ammonia engine, you can achieve great greenhouse gas emission reduction. But ammonia is corrosive, so you have to consider what would happen if you can use ammonia for bunkering. Some may say that ammonia could share the existing infrastructure, but it will be difficult to produce ammonia, difficult to double the global production of ammonia overnight. And we also have to consider greenhouse gas emission effect of sulfur. So even if, let's say, there is a technology available in the market, and then we still have to consider whether the new fuel or new technology will be applied and used right away. Methanol can be stored at room temperature, but if it cannot be converted into a renewable energy, based on LCA, its greenhouse gas emission will increase by 5%. By region, by country, costs that will take to use these new alternative fuels will be different. So We also have to consider whether nuclear power can be considered for calculation of EEXI, EEDI, and CII. Now you are seeing supply and production of ammonia. The process of the production and supply of ammonia. Regarding ammonia and methanol, we have an existing supply chain at the global level. For your information, Korea is not producing a single drop of ammonia and ethanol as a fuel. We depend on import. That means Korea has to consider situations in other countries. In other words, the exports of ammonia and ethanol. That also means Korea needs to come up with a breakthrough idea to combine ammonia or ethanol with other alternative fuels. Some countries may have to build infrastructure and ships to effectively transport ammonia and other alternative fuels. They also need to build capacity to manage risks, associated risks. And IPEF the Indo-Pacific Economic Frame and RCEP, those economic cooperative frameworks should be strengthened so that each country can come up with an idea and a way to strengthen their supply chains of fuel. For your information, ammonia combination and production technologies have been discussed. And Korea is still discussing whether it will continue to import ammonia from other countries or whether it will build its own infrastructure for ammonia production. Let's take a look at the graph. On the left-hand side, you are seeing a map. It shows how much it costs to produce electricity in each region. The reality may look different, but at least this can give you a theory. And depending on the country, it costs differently when the country produces methanol or ammonia. There was a test case for transportation ammonia from Japan to other country. So the cost of transferring ammonia depends on which route and which you are going to use and from which country to which country they will be transported. So if you combine methanol with H2, hydrogen, and the use of byproduct hydrogen can present a new business model, but methanol is drawing much attention as an alternative fuel, but it may not be realistic to use methanol for all shipping trade or ships because the economic feasibility has not been proven yet. And we think we use ammonia to transport hydrogen, and the ammonia carrier will use ammonia as a fuel, and methanol carrier should use methanol as a fuel if you think about economic feasibility. If you assume that these alternative fuels will be used for marine fuels, and if you consider the life cycle of ships, which lasts about 25 years, we have to expect many errors and failures, operational failures and errors, So here, reliable supply chain of alternative fuels is the key. it is very important for shipping companies to have a reliable supply chain in the place. And CRISO believes that CRISO is doing research on building such as reliable supply chain. This is the example of demonstration ships based on displacement. It is 3,700 tons. So the key is how we can provide the technology and alternative fuels we want to provide in a reliable manner. Only then we can make green and eco-friendly ships and fuels available at sea. We have been verifying the technologies for coastal small vessels according to IMO's roadmap. We have to also test a safety test, or we have to also test the safety for larger ships to follow the requirements of the roadmap by 2025. Key infrastructure should be in place, and by 2030, for each ship, 70% greenhouse gas emissions should be reduced by 70% and up to 80%, like the Secretary General of the IMO said. And CRISO has been doing many demonstration projects and tests, and we have been enhancing international cooperation for such tests and research, and we want to make agenda out of them. There are many challenges and problems, environmental problems that only one country cannot resolve, and only one country cannot resolve alone. And if you contact us, we are always welcome to cooperate with you. Thank you very much for listening.
Mr. Kang for that presentation. And the presentation really pointed out the importance of technical and economic feasibility in regards to alternative fuels. Let's give Mr. Kang another big round of applause. And again, thank you to each and every of our speakers and all of their presentations and their insights. I myself learned a lot today, I have to say. Now, we're going to proceed in 10 minutes from now, and we'll see our speakers again for our discussion session. So please be back here in 10 minutes. It's currently 4:53, so why don't you come in at around 5 and we'll start at a little past 5, all right? So enjoy a short break and I'll see you in a bit.
내일도 쓸 거 아닌가? 이제 특별 세션, 토론 진행되잖아요. 그때 저희가 마이크가 사회자님이 저장님한테 마이크 넘긴다고 말씀하셨거든요. 그러니까 여기서 받아서 다른 분한테 마이크를 전달드려야 돼요. 토론 끝나면 멘트 해야 되니까 끝나면 마이크.
Ladies and gentlemen, we will now soon begin with our debate session. So please take your seats again. 네, 여러분 잠시 뒤 디베이트가 시작될 예정입니다. 이제 모두 착석해 주시기 바라겠습니다. 네, 여러분 이제 세션 1 전문가 토론. Ladies and gentlemen, we will now begin with the session 1 debate. So everyone who's still standing that is, please take your seats. And those that are coming in right now also, please take your seats now. We're going to start now with the debate session. 네, 여러분 착석 부탁드리겠습니다.
Yeah.
All right, we are now going to start with the session 1 debate session. So may I ask for all of our panel of experts and moderator to come up onto the stage. Ladies and gentlemen, let's welcome them on the stage with a big round of applause. And now, if everyone is ready, I will turn it over to Chairman Sveinung Oftedal from ISWG GHG, who is going to moderate this debate. All right, I'm going to turn the microphone over to you. And I believe, do we have enough microphones over there? I believe I have to turn one over to you. Does everyone have one?
Yes.
Okay.
Well, I think so. Thank you very much. No, I think we are missing one microphone. Okay. Thank you very much for introducing this debate on the session response to climate crisis in the maritime sector. Indeed, I have learned a lot of the presentations we have now listened to. We have observed that it is really a lot of ongoing activities within the maritime sector in order to respond to the climate crisis. But we also have learned that it is a complex task and we have many challenges to resolve. The debate, I will concentrate on 4 main issues, if times allow, perhaps also a 5th. First, I will look into the technical challenges in the transition to the phase-out of GHG emissions. Go further into that issue. Then I would like to have a debate where we concentrate on the scale of the task, the scale of the transition, what it involves when it comes to energy and economy. The third topic is having views on how can we make it happen. The role of governments, the role of ports, the role of the industry, and also then the market response. And finally, we need to look into the importance of the global framework for a global problem, for a global industry. Now, starting then with the first issue, the technical challenges. We have had some presentations on that today, but my question is, when will it be, let's say, normal, the general rule for the industry to look into zero emission solutions? I'm now concentrating both on the short sea shipping and deep sea shipping. When will it be normal for a shipowner to look into zero emission solutions when a new ship is to be ordered? So make a guess for which year and why do you think that year from a technical point of view? Can I then start with Mr. Woo Seong Shim to respond to that quite difficult question?
Today, as I mentioned in my presentation, when will we be able to implement zero carbon navigation or operation? I believe that by 2040 or by 2050, a significant number of vessels will be able to achieve zero carbon operation. Musk announced that it will establish its own supply chain of zero carbon operation, but I think that by 2040 or 2050, we will be able to achieve zero carbon navigation. And from technical point of view, most of the technical problems will be solved in 30 years. But we need to deal with the social perception on safety. We need to overcome social perception or the citizens' possible prejudice on such technical issues. Today, we talked about carbon capture technologies, and we talked about methane slip reduction technology for LNG vessels. Those technologies are under active research and development. We also need to consider the economic benefit for the ships. We have to ensure the performance level of those technologies, and we need to deal with those technical issues. In the case of zero carbon navigation and operation, we need to make some efforts from infrastructure perspectives. This will be all for my answer.
Thank you for elaborating on this quite difficult topic to be certain on. But Mr. Kim, if you should guess from a technical viewpoint, if we continue in the pace we are moving forward now, When do you think it is, let's say, normal for a ship owner to consider as zero-emission vessels when a new ship is ordered?
예,
Personally, I think technically, if we think about technology only, we will be able to develop necessary technologies in short term. If we think about ammonia-fueled ships, you can take an example of MAN. It already made such engines available, and hydrogen has its own technical challenges. So it will be difficult to use hydrogen for large commercial vessels soon. But if you think about ammonia and e-methanol, they will be available sooner, rather than later. We won't have significant technical barriers now. But the conclusion is how we are going to build infrastructure that will make sure those new fuels will be used in a reliable manner. LNG fuel ships are the most well-known ships using eco-friendly fuels, but it was only 2 to 3 years ago when the LNG-powered ships were available in the market. And it was only 10 years ago when we started talking about LNG-fueled ships. Now we are talking about alternative fuels, and we have this common goal for decarbonization. To achieve this common goal, we are talking about alternative fuels. So I think our prerequisite is infrastructure for supply of alternative fuels, and I think it will take about 10 years from now. Again, we already address and we have measures to address technical barriers now, but the key is infrastructure. It'll take longer to build infrastructure to make sure those alternative fuels will be used for ships.
So, 10 years from now, it is quite a long time, but still, actually, looking into the many challenges we need to resolve is also a very short time. Now, Mr. Park, based on your long experience with the various processes at the IMO and the various transitions we have been through in the maritime sector on other topics, do you share the view that 10 years from now will be the time where most ship owners will look into zero-emission solutions?
Important things to the long history relevant to the development of a market-based mechanism, the discussion in the IMO field. So, to the government, the flag states, and so is taking into considerations to what is the role and the responsibility of the states in terms of due diligence. And so in terms of implementation of the mandatory instrument, the IMO instrument is legally binding instrument. However, sometimes to the shipping industry have a choice to what kind of technology to apply for their own companies is appropriate. And so we also to think about how to make the common goal, how to make the international activity and international networking. And so this kind of conference and this kind of the program for capacity building in terms of the collecting of the investment and the collecting of the funding to make the project to make in terms of the technical transfers. And And so I think it's a long history. However, it is now in this time to we have make a consensus between the UNFCCC side supporting the flag state and another the IMO convention originally strict in needed to make the principle, the IMO principle. And so now is a time to make the consensus between the two sides, both of them. I think so. That is my solution. That's my thinking about it. And so another one is to the government is have to invest the more finance to support to the time the development of technology. In what is the appropriate for the shipping company and what is the appropriate for the making an infrastructure for in terms of port development and shipping routes. Even there is the zero emission route, as we know, to the green corridor. And so I would like to recommend that another one is to the shipping company have to consider to the innovative to management in terms of the ESG management, environment, social, and governance. It is now all the shipping company have to make to the new plan for in the future. That is my comment. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And then I will modify my questions a little bit to Mr. Basari, taking into account that 10 years have been indicated for new builds, taking into account that we succeed on building consensus, like Mr. Park said. Mr. Basari, do you also think that at this stage there will be technical possible to modify existing vessels for this transition, or are we just looking into new builds? What's your view on that one?
Thank you, Mr. Officer. I will try to answer the question in the way I understood it. I think there is a difference between talking about zero carbon shipping and 50% carbon shipping as proposed by IMO 2050. In terms of technological solution, as I mentioned in my presentation, it depends on the type of fuel that would be eventually in the situation. From my perspective, we need to go for e-fuels from renewable energy. There is no other choice if you are going to zero carbon. And if you go to e-fuel, with basically the option could be like ammonia, or it could be like methanol, or it could be hydrogen. If you get, let's say, enough electricity, renewable electricity, which could give you enough methanol as a form of carbon neutral fuel, I would say technology would be there for ships more or less immediately. That's my view. But already we have got ships operating with methanol, so there is no issue. Most of the logistic aspects could be handled, etc. If we go the route of ammonia, it would be longer because we are not there. And if we go hydrogen, I think there would be a lot more pressure on the ship technology side. So this is the way I see it. If we aim for zero carbon future, and we assume that the three options, hydrogen, ammonia, and methanol are there, methanol is the most accessible and, in my view, the best ideal one. And then after that, it would be ammonia and then hydrogen. Any of those would give us the solution. From my perspective, the biggest constraint is production of renewable hydrogen. I don't think with the current pace that we are going forward, we would get that enough before 20.
So you are leaving us still with a challenge then. There will be a problem when it comes to the supply to the ships for the various solutions. But if I now turn to the ports, Mr. Berlin, if we take a 10-year horizon where we will have ships operating with zero emission solutions on the various types of solutions we have now had identified, let's say 10 years time from now, how long time will the ports need in order to be ready to serve those ships, taking this then from, let's say, a global context? Will the ports also need at least 10 years time for, let's say, zero emission market?
Thank you very much for the question. Yes, I do believe that ports, as I tried to highlight during my presentation, are quite complex. So sometimes it's also difficult to generalize. But I would say that, just to echo with Dr. Bazari mentioned, depends also which kind of a fuel the shipping sector will select. We know that there is, especially in Europe, already LNG bunkering is become part of directives, so where core port has to provide infrastructure for LNG bunkering, or at least a barge. So I would say in this respect, depend of the selection of fuel or renewable, say, energy, that could have a different framework. I would say also that one of the big challenging is also to select what is appropriate for port, so for the business model of the port, what is the infrastructure that is more appropriate. Because also we need to consider, for instance, how many vessels are equipped with this kind of fuels, or for instance, even they use onshore power supply. So there is, I think, in my opinion, the challenge we need to find a business model. So in terms of time, perhaps 10 years, I would say globally, it's not enough. So I think we will still have, let's say, some gap in terms of have a common, let's say, infrastructure, right? So I think this also lead another, let's say, important topic, that is the shipping green corridor. So I would say that is a little bit the overall, let's say, goal, right? To have a net zero carbon shipping routes, but also it's important to have the availability of these bunkering facility during the route, so where ports can play an important role. And then, of course, is how to financing this infrastructure. Once again, go back also to the port governance, how the port is governed, and then also financial administration. So coming short, I would say that perhaps for some kind of fuels, in 10 years, port, I think also with the push of enforcement regulation, can already adapt some of the infrastructure. But like ammonia, I think they will require more time. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that answer, and I have been, let's say, trying to push for a target year, or a 10-year frame for, say, being ready for operating on zero emission vessels, but the panel so far have said that okay, it is needed with a little bit of extra time, because the task is quite complex. Now, looking into then early markets in some certain national operations, or let's say early pilot projects, Mr. Kang, you also looked into how that could be possible. Can we see in some regions and some national domestic operations some earlier zero emissions solutions? What's your observation on that one?
제가 아는
Okay, personally, I think no one has decided and no one knows yet which alternative fuel will be the fuel in the future. And for shipping companies, it will be very challenging and difficult to replace all the fuels with new alternative fuels. And some shipyards have 3 years of construction order. So it is very difficult to predict the exact alternative fuel, the most effective alternative fuel. In terms of Korea, in the case of Korea, the Korean government is taking a closer look at IMO agendas and international organizations' agenda, and we are trying to focus on what we can do. And we are also working on standardization of new technologies, and from some time from now, we can work together to come up with common agenda that can be applied to new fuels and new technologies. So we are trying not to focus only on Korea. We are trying to focus on international cooperation. We are going to work together with other countries to develop new technologies and new alternative fuels.
To all of you for that interesting feedback on, let's say, the technical challenges for the transition towards zero emission solutions. Now, let's dig into the scale of the task. The need for energy to produce the various types of fuels needed. The scale of investment. We all observe that that is quite significant. So, with all the alternative fuel solutions in place and the present energy situation worldwide, will we have enough supply of the alternative fuels? And can I also then have a follow-up issue? Will also that push for the carbon capture and storage technology used by ships as well? So if I can now have a response to my question, the scale of the task, will there be enough supply? Will we have then multiple solutions also involving the carbon capture and storage? Mr. Shim, can you provide your response to that question?
Who is your question going to?
Seong Shim.
포집 한국조선해양 시무소
심우승. In order to implement carbon capture and storage technology, we need to make investment. For example, we have to install the system on the ship and we have to do demonstration. And this process requires cost and it's difficult to say specifically how much investment we need, maybe from 20 billion to 50 billion dollars. Korean won, from 20 billion to 50 billion Korean won. But developing and demonstrating carbon capture and storage system is not the end of the process. In order to fully utilize carbon capture and storage system, we have to develop many other things. Like we have to develop kind of mine, and we have to find the proper CCUS model and create economic business model. Many countries are conducting pilot projects regarding carbon capture and storage system. And we could estimate the rough cost and the scale of investment required for carbon capture and storage. But as far as I understand, many pilot projects are not yet scaled up to a level to solve all the problems related to carbon capture. And for me, it's difficult to exactly mention the exact scale of investment required for carbon capture and storage. I think that the scale of investment could be more accurately estimated by anyone from government or public organizations.
Thank you very much for that answer. And then I turn to Mr. Kim on the same question. Now, the scale of the task of the transition, and will there be enough energy and to produce the alternative fuels, and will the call for multiple solution also call for CO2 capture technology on ships? What is your best guess on this?
제가 생각할 때는
Personally, I think CO2 capture and onboard CCS has already been commercialized by planes. This is not a new technology. Onshore planes have been already using CCS, and they can be now expanded to ships. But there is one condition: to scale up the technology. And that's the key. That's the challenge the shipping industry should overcome. As I said in my presentation, the captured CO2 should be temporarily stored on board before being released onshore. But in this process, we have to consider space penalty, as I mentioned in my presentation. And that is one of the biggest obstacles for ship owners to consider when ship owners consider adopting onboard CCS. As I said earlier, Denmark is using dry ice, using cryogenic method. In Korea, ionization is another option for ship owners to consider. But we also have to consider London Convention, which is one of the IMO's instruments. Release and discharge of captured CO2. A convention regarding it requires approval from the international organization. So this will take a longer time to come up with solution. And regarding energy sources, do we have enough energy sources now? I think I'm not in the right position to give you a right guess because I'm not the expert in that area. As of 2018, according to IMO's fourth report, the international shipping is emitting 740 million CO2. Let's talk about ETS. If you consider each credit is $85 every year, 29 billion euros will be needed to offset emission. That's the best answer I can give you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Mr. Park, regarding the supply of future alternative fuels and the need for energy, what's your view? Do you think that companies are now planning for such increased supply to shipping, or are everybody sitting and looking at each other?
예, 지금 현재
For now, many companies are focusing on making profit for their business. And now many companies are making choices that can actually help them make profit by enabling the supply of fuel that is available right now. LNG is the most frequently used fuel. And many companies are building LNG fueled vessels. For the 2 to 3 years from now on, we will see a larger number of LNG vessels in the Korean shipyard. And for the future, maybe next year or the year after next year, alternative fuel-based vessels like ammonia-fueled vessels will be developed. The alternative fuels like ammonia-fueled engines will be further developed and tested, but there is no advanced infrastructure to receive the ammonia fuel or other alternative fuel in Korea. As I mentioned, we need to go through 2 tracks. First of all, you can build vessels and engines that can help companies make profit for right now. But secondly, they have to make efforts for R&D. They have to conduct research and development of alternative fuel related technologies and vessels. So companies should prepare themselves for future demand for ammonia or other alternative fuel-based vessels. So if we reach international consensus on green corridor, then there will be more aggressive activities to establish and build zero-carbon alternative fuel-based vessels. Companies that do not succeed in these efforts will find it difficult to survive in the market.
Thank you. And so now looking into the green corridors, which you identified, and also having the information in some of the presentations that indeed some ports are looking into establishing green corridors. Let me then turn to a wider questions. How can we make this happen? How can we make the transition to low and zero emission solutions happen? The role of governments, ports, and industry, and indeed also the global regulator, the IMO. Mr. Basari, if you should give an advice to governments, what would your advice be to make this happen?
Thank you very much for that. It's a difficult question to answer, to be honest. The way I look at it, as I mentioned in my previous answers, it all depends on the pathways for maritime decarbonization that we choose. If we assume that the pathway is electric fuels, then my advice to the government, I'm talking to the government, not necessarily the maritime sector, would be concentrate on production of e-fuels, because that is outside the remits of maritime industry. It is part of the industry activity. So that's the government. Okay. Now, if you ask me to advise the maritime sector, then again I would say if I have chosen this pathway as the most probable one which happen, then of course the policymakers, the maritime, they got to sort out the issue of price differentials, the issue sustainability issue, which is there through proper life cycle analysis, the issue of regulatory gaps through development of regulations. That's really the broad answer that I can provide.
Thank you very much, Mr. Bassari. And then concentrating on how can we make this happen and the role of the various players. So, Fabio Ballini, if I could then ask you, what would your advice be to governments to make this happen, and also how can we make the ports take even, let's say, further steps to stimulate this transition to zero-emission shipping?
Thank you very much for this challenging question. I would say that probably one of the important first step is also to promote a platform where also private and public actor can discuss and working together. So I think it's one of the first point to activate the full chain. So in this case, I will look from seaport and all the supply chain. This will help also the entire zero emission value chain to be created. And also another point that also Dr. Bassari mentioned, we need also appropriate policy incentive, right, in order to facilitate this transition, because require infrastructure investment that are quite challenging for all the stakeholders. Then regulation on that can also be an important driver. In terms of port, I do believe that port could have an important role to activate this green corridor. There are already some pilot project, pilot action in order to see the feasibility and also what are the different routes that can be activated along the zero net value chain. So I would say the challenge will be on, I think the barrier in this case will be the same. It can be financial barrier and also the stakeholder commitment, and then also to promote a demand for green let's say emission scheme. So that is also could be another important point that is for ports, but I do believe is also for all the actors involved in the supply chain.
Thank you very much for that advice and good answer, I would say. And now the last 5 minutes are of panel discussion. I start with Mr. Kong, and I would like all of you to then respond to the issue of the global framework for a global problem for the global industry. Now, if you should give an advice to the IMO process, so is it one encouragement, one advice for the IMO to succeed on this global challenge? And you have, one of you will have then 30 seconds to provide that advice. You will, Mr. Kang, you will be the first.
That's a tough question to answer. So let me give you a short answer. So everything comes down to opinion of each stakeholder and how each stakeholder will share economic benefits from decarbonization. Developing countries have advanced technologies, and there are less developed countries that need a technology transfer from those advanced technologies. If we want to accelerate decarbonization, we need cooperation between developed and developing countries. Thank you.
Thank you. That was very precise. Then I turn to Mr. Ballini again.
Thank you. I think also, in my opinion, it's quite important to, of course, to build up on the good base of the IMO GHG strategy. That is a very good starting point. And I do believe that stakeholder involvement and consultation between developing country, and all the actor is one of the key drivers. So that is my suggestion again, stakeholder involvement.
Thank you. And while we are getting this advice, I hope the IMO Secretariat is taking notes, so thank you. And then I turn to Mr. Basari.
I would go along the same way. I would say IMO GHGS strategy should be the kernel of the activities of the IMO. They may need to have more precise targets in between, even 2040, 2030, and they may need to have more monitoring of the progress toward the targets. And finally, of course, IMO should pave the way to make sure that potential electrofuels are really regulated sooner so that it could be applied on ships. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Park, do you have some advice for the IMO to reach the success?
예, 내년도에
From 2023, the final IMO strategy will be adopted. In the final strategy, I hope that there will be a framework for each country to create an action plan, which is national action plan, how each country will implement the IMO strategy and regulation, how are they going to do R&D, and what they're going to do about infrastructure development. Such content should be included in the national action plan. So when IMO adopts the final strategy, it could show some model framework for countries, then it will be helpful for the countries to come up with their own strategy to implement the IMO regulation. Organic cooperation system and mutual cooperation should be conducted smoothly. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Park. And then Mr. Kim, one advice to all those negotiating at the IMO. What shall they do to succeed?
저는 두 가지로 얘기를
I'd like to tell you two things. One is I hope IMO addresses uncertainties regarding regulations so that ship owners and the shipbuilding industries can make fast decisions. Regarding uncertainties, I mean the standards and criteria of tank to wake and well to wake. So there are some uncertainties regarding those two. And whether it will be CO2 or CH4 or N2, there are also uncertainties regarding those chemicals and harmful substances. So what I hope the most is the clear signal from the IMO on criteria. The second thing I'd like to point out is to address technical barriers. And CO2 capture technology, it cannot be considered for EEXI and EEDI or CII calculation in the first place. And they will discourage the shipping industry to come up with breakthrough technologies. I think that is a policy barrier, so I hope IMO will reduce and break down those regulatory barriers and give more clear signals.
예, 저도
In terms of IMO regulation, I think it is important to eliminate uncertainty in the IMO regulation. And I really wish that IMO regulation will become more clearer. For now, I would like to make a request to IMO that although there are uncertainties, experts and specialists could make the uncertainties disappear. I know that there are many excellent, renowned experts and specialists in IMO, and Today, in this conference, we have many experts and front-end working level people from shipping companies and port and many different industries. I hope that IMO will work more closely with the stakeholders from the industries, and it will be helpful for them to succeed in the regulation.
Much all of you. My final observation is that yes, there are indeed many challenges to be resolved on our route to decarbonization, but also on the optimistic tone that it is really much hard and good work going on in order to resolve those challenges. And by that, I thank you all to the panelists for your insights and comments, and I turn it over to you.
Thank you very much for that interesting and thought-provoking debate and all of your contribution. Let's give our panel of experts and moderator a big, big round of applause. Thank you very much. You may now return to your seat. Thank you. All right, and that now concludes the first session of the 2022 Korea Maritime Week, which dealt with response to climate crisis in the maritime sector. Thank you very much for everyone's participation throughout the day, and I also hope to see you tomorrow for session 2 and 3, which are themed Green Shipping Forum and MAS, or Maritime Autonomous Surface Ship. Now, I have a few announcements to make. One announcement for our distinguished guests that are invited for the dinner reception that will start in 10 minutes from now. So please, on the first floor in the ballroom, you can follow our staff to the venue. We're going to start in 10 minutes from now. And also for our other guests, if you need a shuttle bus to Osiria Station, please go to the first floor. The shuttle bus will be there at 6:15 and 6:30 respectively. 네, 셔틀버스 이용하실 분들은요. 6시 15분이랑 6시 30분에 1층에서 오시리아역까지 타실 수 있습니다. All right, thank you very much, everyone. This has been Soa Kwon, and I will see you either at the dinner reception or hopefully tomorrow. 네, 여러분 감사합니다. Thank you very much.